Good morning, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this session on securing global health for the socio-economic transformation. You will know that in general, the whole discussion that we need a new social contract for health has gathered pace. It's gathered pace nationally, it's gathered pace internationally around the discussion also of global public goods. And as you've seen in the announcement of the meeting, it says we need a socio-economic transformation for an economy that supports social well-being. And of course, even beyond that, and those of you that were in the opening session will be very aware of this socio-economic transformation, of course, also includes the climate challenges, the environmental challenges, and everything that comes with that. So we have a very interesting session which has been organized jointly by the World Health Summit and the Global Solutions Summit. Some of you might be aware of the Global Solutions Summit, which is organized by the Global Solutions Initiative, which was founded by Dennis Snower. He is also the president of the Global Solutions Initiative. And to mark this cooperation, Dennis will speak to us virtually because he can't be here with us. So if we could please have the video and please hear what Dennis Snower has to share with us.
It's a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome you to this session on improving global health for the socio-economic transformation. This is a terribly important subject because health does not depend primarily on just medical services to treat diseases, nor does it depend primarily on our economic activities. And these thoughts have been dominating health policy so far. We need a wider understanding of human well-being in order to gain an adequate understanding of health. We require a socioeconomic transformation in order to make the world environmentally sustainable, make our health systems resilient, and make us able to adapt to the rapidly changing world that we face around us nowadays. And adaptability is absolutely essential for public health. Now, to gain a wider understanding of the importance of health, we need, as I said, a wider understanding of human well-being. And in Global Solutions, we have assembled an international team of people who have established the first normative dashboard of well-being that rests on four broad indicators: solidarity, agency, material gain, and environmental sustainability. So S for solidarity, A for agency, G for material gain, and E for environmental sustainability. And that's why we call it the SAGE, SAGE dashboard, which gives you a broad understanding of the social side of well-being, which is how embedded you are in your societies, the solidarity aspect, your sense of agency, your empowerment to affect your circumstances through your own efforts. Material gain is the economic side, of course, and environmental sustainability is environmental performance, our life within the world around us. Each of these has important implications for health. If we have a strong community or set of communities in which we live, then that will help our health enormously, especially our mental health, but it will also give us a wider set of people to rely on in times of need. If we have a sense of agency, empowerment, then that helps us cope with the health crises that we face. Material gain is clearly important because income gives access to health, and living in a healthy environment is absolutely crucial for health. So Each of the elements of the SAGE dashboard, SAGE, have effects on health, and these effects feed back on solidarity, agency, material gain, and environmental performance. Because the healthier you are, the easier it is for you to play a valuable role in your community, solidarity. The more empowered you feel, that's agency. The more productive you are at work, and that gives you more income, that's material gain. And the healthier you are, the more concerned you are about preserving your environment, and that is the environmental sustainability side. So there's a feedback loop between all elements of the SAGE dashboard and health, and back again to the elements of the SAGE dashboard. So a broader understanding of well-being gives us a broader understanding of health, and once we have this broader understanding, then we know that we need to measure the effectiveness of government policy and the effectiveness of business strategies on this basis. So government's effectiveness with regard to health is not only to be assessed with regard to what their health ministries do, but what their environmental ministries and social ministries, employment ministries do, because all of these feedback on health. The social determinants of health are terribly important. Housing conditions, childhood education and nutrition, water quality, unemployment and job security are easily as important to health as the medical interventions that we make. And so we need an all-of-government approach to assessing the effects of government of health, and an all-of-business approach to assess the effects of business on health. And once we have done that, then I think we are in a much better position to understand where the importance of health lies and the importance it should be given not only in our lives but in government policy and in global policy at the World Health Organization level. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your deliberations in this session on improving health for the socio-economic transformation.
Well, from afar, I say thank you very much, Dennis. And it's wonderful to see actually how a convergence is developing. The World Health Organization for quite some time tried to put social determinants, commercial determinants, environmental determinants on the agenda, but it proved to be very difficult. Many of you will know that the health in all policies, healthy public policies was a war cry nearly of WHO, but nobody was listening. And we're starting to see that in this crisis situation, people are starting to listen. And we're starting to see that other disciplines and other sectors are also realizing their role for health. And therefore, it's from the perspective of health, it is incredibly welcome that this discussion around this new kind of dashboard around determinants, even if some other language is being used, is really supportive of such a health agenda. And some of you will know that WHO in December of last year approved a document. It's called the Geneva Charter. It's been discussed also at the World Health Assembly, that speaks of a well-being society, which includes these elements. And a whole number of countries have come together. Here in Europe, for example, Finland has been driving this agenda around a well-being economy. So we see how these agendas start to come together, and this is really a fascinating development. And we'd like to discuss this development now, also with a view to recent really important meetings like G7 and German G7 presidency, with Dirk Meyer, the Director General, the Department of Global Health, Employment, Transformation of the Economy, Digital Technologies, Food and Nutrition Security. Now you know why I put on my glasses. You know, I couldn't have remembered all that. at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. We call it BMZ. And Markus Engels, who's the Secretary General of the Global Solutions Initiative. And I'll ask you to come up here, please. So the idea is to have this short conversation. Mr. Meyer has to leave us punctually for another meeting at
yes, in here.
in here, but I'm sorry, can somebody do something, because I hear myself here, which is a bit disconcerting. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Meyer, if I might start with you, socio-economic transformation, we heard this. And of course, also the Global Solutions Initiative was very active in running the Think 7 with a whole range of recommendations to the G7. Some colleagues who were involved in this are here in the audience. And so let me just ask you this very, very general question. How aware is the G7 of the need for a socio-economic transformation? Not just, let's solve another problem, but how do we approach the problems actually, perhaps with a different mindset? Did you feel something like that in the G7?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I didn't just feel it when I attended the G7 meetings. A couple of days ago, I went to the annual meeting of the World Bank, coming back there. And what you see now is a shift after the experience of COVID, as I always say, as a big learning machine for everything. The move towards a holistic approach on more or less all the big problems and crises we have is becoming a common consensus. And that's really important, I think. To be even a bit provocative and open, I would say the biggest devastation we had over the last decades is the cultural devastation caused by the neoliberal ideas that everybody has to care for himself and herself, and then the common goods will come by coincidence. At least since COVID, we see that this is completely wrong. And there are a lot of people probably around also in this room working for holistic approaches, also in the health policy, criticized this way. And now we see that we reach the planetary boundaries. And we all know that it is the global north that is responsible for that. But what we realize too is that the first effects and the brutal effects we see in the global south. We talk about the droughts and the bad harvests in Africa. We talk about the floods in Pakistan at the moment. Everywhere we see it. So there is no option but a socio-economic transformation, which is forced by a climate change, but it has impacts on all other spheres of life, as you already said. So the leaders are now on the way to look what are the holistic, the comprehensive, the collaborative measures to undertake to solve the big problems. And that also means that we have to change our way of economy, our way of living, our way of regarding progress. And that's part of the talks, not just in G7, it is part in G20, who also look at the responsibilities and the UN General Assembly meetings and so on. So it's becoming a common spirit.
Thank you very much. And we know that partly also from discussions at the OECD, also around well-being, finding new indicators for well-being, Mr. Engels. But also the constant discussion that is also mounting, I think, that the measure of GNP, doesn't really tell us what societies are really about, where the wealth is. I serve on the WHO Council on the Economics of Health for All, and we've drawn attention to the fact that, for example, women's unpaid care work doesn't appear anywhere, and our societies would break down if that wasn't happening. So could you tell us a bit more how you see that relationship of your dashboard to measures such as GNP or alternative measures that are starting to be developed? Or are you saying, hey, our dashboard does it all, use that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I'm totally underlying what Mr. Meyer just said. What we are witnessing at the moment is a more or less a total mind shift. We see the development of a new paradigm because, as you rightly or correctly just said, we measured progress so far with material gain and had the belief in a way that there's an invisible hand, and that invisible hand, or call it God or whoever, will
the market.
The market, which is God, obviously, will by either by coincidence or ever automatic outcome produce common goods, and obviously that does not work. So growth, material gain, does not mean anything if we destroy the planet, if we destroy communities, if we challenge agency, empowerment, if people really feel lost in the modern world. So therefore, we really need that crucial mind shift. And part of that mind shift and the new paradigm is, of course, that we overcome silos. And that is, from my point of view, a great success. Hopefully, I remember it correct. That was in 2019 when the Japanese G20 presidency put together in one room the ministers of health together with the ministers of finance, and the German G7 presidency this year put together the ministers from economic cooperation and development and health. And that is really crucial because, as Dennis Noah said at the beginning, it is really linked to the digital sphere, it's linked to the labor market, it's linked to at least to everything. So we need that holistic approach, and I see more and more through the dashboard and other initiatives that mind shift, which is obviously needed.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, we're not alone in the world, obviously. There's geopolitics out there. There are countries with different systems. As we sit here, I think in China, they are meeting on the future of their policies and their new leadership. India is taking on the G20 with a very, very big agenda. It's now the 5th largest economy in the world, but still with millions of poor people. So what about this rethinking this socio-economic transformation that we are thinking about here in Berlin and the rest of the world? First of all, the big geopolitical players, what's their model of the future? Do we meet anywhere? And then those that are really destitute, what does this socio-economic transformation mean for the Sahel?
Well, first of all, I'd say that all these, what we call the grand challenges, needs a cooperative political matrix. And therefore, coming from the BMZ with a development perspective and with a lot of discussions with representatives from the Global South, I know that our view is just one view on all the topics. So it is also crucial to listen, and to listen also to the question of responsibilities, and therefore also to the question of who is going to finance what. So the first message I would try to leave is that these grand challenges need international cooperation And that means that we have to use any possibility to be into discussion and to be into common development of solutions. And therefore, it is necessary to have the G20, to have the G77, to have all the multilateral organizations where we have the places where we can develop the common politics. That's the first message. Second one is, especially countries like India are that big, are that crucial, that we have to work together to prevent new lock-ins. This is also self-critical. I mean, when we fear a strong winter and we are looking for fossil sources, we should be very aware that we don't start new lock-ins in the global south. So it is very much also our responsibility to find the right pathways. And as Japan is taking over the G7 and has a strong commitment to the One Health approach, India is taking the topic also like Indonesia on top of the G20. I hope that we have the places, the institutions where we can organize even more progress on this common approach than we did in the last period.
So you're saying, you know, we do have institutions that work together, that can create consensus, that at minimum can create dialogue. Because yes, I think one thing we don't want, and that's a clear message, is an increasing fragmentation of the system or even a decoupling, that we don't talk together anymore. How does Russia fit into this?
It's complicated. At the end, Russia has the same topics. I mean, the planetary boundaries are also planetary boundaries in the end, also for Russia. We have the situation at the moment where it is very difficult to have any kind of dialogue. What we see in the international institutions, in the multilateral organizations, that it is difficult, for instance, to get over to communiques. But with the chair summaries, we have diplomatic steps to agree on special points and not naming it communiques. So that's maybe a beginning of coming together. At the end, of course, it's necessary that war ends and that diplomacy and talking comes back. That's at the beginning of everything. But nevertheless, I think we should use any possibility to find same attitudes to the grand challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Engels. That leads me to a suggestion that has come from the Global Solutions Summit. You're saying, yes, you know, there's all these bodies out there, and possibly some of us think there's too many, but we're suggesting a club model. Could you say something about that club model?
I mean, what we just learned from the German G7 president, you all know that climate club model, which is, I think, the wording is very bad because a club is not open, it's not integrative, but it should be, and it's meant like that. I know that, and obviously there's a link between climate and health. But the main idea is really good to really enable governments and states who are willing to do more, really to push policies in that direction. And I think that we need the sort of, not a club, but an initiative to global health as well. So really to address the problem that there are some blockades in international institutions due to the war and other and other situations, and therefore this might be one idea to overcome these blockades, and that might be good. But I want to say, beside the governments and beside all initiatives and all donations we have to the global for the global health, I really think the mind shift is for one reason really important, that it's like a little bit like the climate question. As soon as you address the purpose in a different way, there will be more initiatives, and you don't have to wait always if private companies do this or that. They see it as a holistic approach, and then it's the purpose of business, for example. It's the purpose of government really to have sustainable and resilient financing of the global health. And I think, therefore, we need, beside the international institutions, we need that paradigm change. And there, the G20 is really crucial, because it's always also include the so-called global South. China, India, you mentioned that, and therefore these institutions are important.
Yeah, even though if you talk to some African countries, they wouldn't see that the G20 is particularly representative.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you have 20 countries that have 85% of the world population, but, the United Nations does have, 197. So I don't think it's quite that. And that's what India is grappling with as a voice of middle income countries, how to involve Africa and others. And they are trying to look at it. We have to move towards the end, because Mr. Meyer has to leave us, but we do have, one new construct, one new mechanism that's been agreed through the G20 in relation to pandemics, the new fund that has been created. It's been very interesting. A lot of diplomatic energy has also gone into creating this fund, and Germany was not really in favor of it. The idea was that the fund should have, well, which there.
With whom you speak.
I know, that's
We
what
were.
That's what I am trying to get to. Thank you for jumping in straight away. The idea was, to have 10 billion. Right now, one has, I think, 1.4 or 1.6. So tell us about this fund. We're talking global solutions. What global solution does this fund bring? We have it now,
Yes, well,
how is it most
first of all,
helpful?
we thought from the BMZ point that it is absolutely crucial to have that. We were very much engaged in the developing and shaping of this FIF. We think we are happy that we have went into it, that it is constructed, that it is on the way, and we will try to continue to shape it. It is one element in a huge element. I mean, before I was on a panel on neglected tropical diseases. What you see there is that the ownership by the countries and by the communities is crucial for any progress. So, of course, if we talk about preparedness for coming diseases, for access to health care systems, we are always talking also about the responsibility on the ground. But on the other hand, we need a kind of a fund of funds, because during the crisis, we saw that there were gaps with the crisis of COVID. We saw that there are gaps that should be filled by this fund. So we continue with the classical funds we have. We continue with and push the One Health approach by the German government, but we strengthen by this also the multilateral engagement to fill financial gaps, so that we are much more prepared for the coming pandemics, which are coming as far as we know. And coming from the BMZ and seeing how many shadow crises were caused by the pandemic, it is absolutely crucial to be prepared for the next one, so that we don't fall in the same mistakes. Last word, this also includes, for instance, for the African continent, its own vaccination production, which we try to support also by the BMZ and the federal government.
And of course, here I have to say it's not only about vaccination, it's also therapeutics and diagnostics.
It is an
That needs-
ecosystem.
Absolutely.
It's a complete
just
ecosystem.
For the audience, it's
Yes,
important.
when I mention it, I mean it like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's very important that that we always say that, because in some discussions, there's been too much focus on vaccines only and not the integration also into health systems and other aspects. So this is a fund that is really intended to help countries fill those gaps at the national level. Mr. Engels, you have, solidarity, agency, material gain, and environmental challenges. Which of these are most important that finance ministers rethink, that they change their mindset? I would say on all four, of course, but give me one. I mean, solidarity is something that maybe is not of prime importance to some finance ministers.
I mean, as Dennis now said, of course, they are all interrelated, and without environmental issues, we can't win the battle of global health. Without food security, we can't win the battle of health. That's for sure. But that is on the level of macroeconomics, where I really would like to emphasize that business accounting is, for example, very important as well to gain private money. If, let's say, a CEO of a big worldwide operating company wants to do something good, and the shareholders rightly say, you can't do that because our purpose is to gain money, to gain profits, then the system does not work. And that is another reason why we really need that shift into not only on the GDP level, that's a recoupling dashboard, but also on the business level, really to have a sustainable financing system, which is sustainable, of course, but resilient as well.
Thank you. And I would actually take it one step further. It's not only in sort of the gain for individual businesses, but it's really also the perspective of, does our gain also contribute to stability in society, for example? Neither of you has mentioned the word equity. So I would like give you a chance before you leave this panel to say something about equity. And I'm consciously leaving it so vague, leaving it to you. What's the equity agenda here?
Sorry that we mentioned all aspects in 20 minutes, but equity, I mean, we spoke about the so-called global south and the G20, and I mean, not the equity of distributions of vaccines, for example, was a major backslash in negotiations about everything, because Global South said, we witnessed the sort of vaccine nationalism, as always. We were affected, but you had a sort of nationalism. We witnessed that in Europe as well, and so equity is a precondition for having common and global solutions. Obviously.
Thank you. Last word.
Implicitly, I talked about equity from the beginning on, because when we talk about the reason for the socio-economic transformation, we are talking about our responsibility with our way of doing economy for climate change. And therefore, we are most responsible for that. And therefore, this is an implicit question of seeing equity. And therefore, it's also our duty to bring in our financial possibilities to fight climate change by this now.
Thank you very much. So I think, though, at the same time, for many countries and many civil society organizations, the visibility of the equity agenda is an incredibly critical one and needs to come to the fore. So thank you very much for your contributions to our discussion on the socio-economic transformation. And you are free now to go to your next meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. This is the great thing about this summit, that all kinds of side meetings are happening and people can and must move back and forth. So it's my pleasure now to invite the panel that will be discussing and then also taking some of your questions. First of all, I'd like to invite John Curtin, who's the co-director of the G7 research group, the G20 research group, the Global Health Diplomacy Program and BRICS research group at the University of Toronto. And he was also involved with the Global Solutions Summit in their T7 work. Then I'd like to invite Tanja Rödiger-Vorwerk, who's the Deputy Director for Global Health, Resilience, Equality of Opportunity in the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ that you have already encountered. Anil Soni, the Chief Executive Officer of the WHO Foundation. Sabine Gilliam, who's the Country President of Pfizer Germany. We've heard about the responsibility of business. And finally, Pascal Alloté, who was previously the director of the International Institute of Global Health at the UN University, also involved in T20 activities, and particularly under the Italian presidency, I understand, Pascal, and who is now with the World Health Organization as a director on sexual and reproductive health, and one of the really critical issues in global health, where she is tasked with addressing the rollback that we are experiencing. And I'd like to start with you, Pascal. Socio-economic transformation and the issue I just raised, the situation of women, the situation around rights and sexual and reproductive health and rights, the situation of being able to show your hair or not. How do these kind of power and inequality issues enter into a new paradigm of a well-being society?
Do I need to?
They're all on, I think.
Okay, great. These were not the questions I was asked to prepare for.
Trust me.
Nonetheless, let me give it a shot. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, or afternoon. Can I just as a general, just a comment from the previous interventions? I do feel that I'll make people a little bit uncomfortable. I think the comments, the general ideas are fantastic. That we do need a different paradigm in the way that we think about this. The thing that really worries me a little bit is that we don't yet have the right processes for engaging with these ideas. And I'm not talking for WHO, but I am coming at this very much from the perspective of somebody from a low middle income country. I'm from Ghana originally, and was working with UNU through Malaysia. And the way in which we get involved in these conversations really does not allow us to engage in a way that makes these ideas meaningful. And I'll then segue through that into the issue around gender and women's engagement in these issues. That the easy answer is that we very rarely get space and get the opportunities to be a part of the discussion. And because within the context of equity, there's so many different dimensions that we're talking about. And it's very easy, if you listen to the debates, to fragment the issues into different things. So the example you gave was the issue of scarves or no scarves. That is very much a personal choice. And it's spoken about as if it's the savior model, where because women who have to cover themselves might be is a symbol of oppression, that they need to be supported. I think that these issues do need to be raised, and it is one of the critical issues when we're talking about gender equality across within a global context. But we do need to be very clear that when you move from the global to the regional to the national to communities to individual agencies, that it is a complex issue. Women should have the agency. Yes, there are, within our patriarchal societies, there are really critical questions about being able to support, but we also have to be a part of that solution. Women have to be a part of that solution, and women in all of their diversity need to be a part of the solution. So it is, I guess the point is that it is a complex issue. We need to get the processes right to make sure that we're bringing the agency together with the support that is required between the global north and the global south, or within patriarchal societies and so on. And a feminist approach would help us to do that.
Thank you, Pascal. And I think your point about processes is so important, because we tend at present, it's very fashionable to look at global health architecture. So we look at the architecture, but we don't look at the processes. Yeah. And the processes to actually avoid certain forms of decoupling that we're experiencing now are actually quite critical. John, you know everything about G7 and G20. Whenever I need to know something, I send him an email and said, John, what did they say? John, do you agree with this assessment that the G7 and the G20 have woken up and are working on a new mind frame, that they know the old neoliberal model doesn't function anymore?
To some degree, but if we flash forward to the present this year, I go back to the beginnings. Each of them was created to do a very different job in the world. And for the G7, it's to protect within their own countries and to promote globally open democracy, individual liberty, we Anglos call that human rights, and social advance. So Dennis and this panel would be pleased there. For the G20, it was financial stability, a very neoliberal thing, one might say, but it was also to make globalization work for the benefit of all. So if you judge them by the reference, that of course both have a long way to go, and they're struggling on both democracy and of course taking care of the bottom 1% even more now. But I think they have learned, if you look at what they actually did, what they actually decided, the evidence tells me that it's the G7 that has acquired its centrality in global governance. And we can do that by comparing the outcomes of the two most recent summits. Elmau was in many ways the most successful G7 summit ever. And that's a big claim after 47 of them. Rome was not, and I don't think anybody has high hopes for Bali coming up. Let me just take one thing which might matter. G7 summits are great global fundraisers. If you need money for all the good things you will want to do, Elmau was the most successful global fundraiser ever. More money for implementing the international health regulations, so the leaders promised. The 7th replenishment of the global fund, and we've heard those numbers. It was actually invented by the G7 with help from the UN. 14 billion for malnutrition. That's a health problem. But the biggest one, 600 billion over the next few years for the Global Partnership for Infrastructure Investment. And what investment is first in line? It's health infrastructure. So Elmau, I think, hit a home run. Rome didn't. And I guess we'll have to wait and see if Indonesia with you know, the fundraising for the FIF can come anywhere close.
Thank you, Tanya.
Okay.
Your response to this? Tell me.
Well, I agree totally with you about the leadership role of G7 and G20, but on the other hand, we just learned also in the session before that it's not representing the whole world. So there's a big gap. So agreed very much. Yes, we need this leadership role, but it's not sufficient. So we need other momentums and other developments as well. But this was only a remark on this, what he just handed over.
But could you say a bit more about the German G7 now? You know, the audience here is not familiar with, you know, there's a pact for pandemic readiness, for example. There is a number of things that were agreed that are still being discussed as we speak. They're actually being discussed or were discussed yesterday just down the corridor here by state secretaries of health in this case. So in terms of what has been decided and discussed, also we heard the first joint meeting of health and development ministers, which was really a breakthrough. You know, what are your hopes also as a ministry, how you can use these G7 agreements to take your work forward and sort of also maybe influence some other parts of the government and the parliament and whatever?
Yeah, okay, so this is a very comprehensive question.
So I'm always trying to give you an entry point, so you have a choice.
So what I see is that Germany was, of course, very strongly involved in the negotiations. And when you started the discussion with Dirk Meyer, you put on your glasses and you tried to figure out the name of his his whole responsibility. But this is on the one hand jokey, but on the other hand it's politics. So it's a very clear policy of my minister behind that we are focusing on a whole bundle of issues. It's on the one hand, the just transition and climate change. This is with my colleague Sattler, and within our directorate and general directorate, it is about the question of global health, One Health. This is very new. It's about jobs and education, and it's about water. So this, on the first glance, it looks very strange to put these sectoral issues together, but when you have a second thought, you see, okay, yeah, One Health, it's linked very closely to water and also health, biodiversity, these kind of issues, they are really linked together. And what I see within the G7 presidency, and coming back to your question, that from my perspective, this is the new leadership. I've been working in the field of biodiversity, energy, and all this for many years, but now I'm in this health area and I see, okay, now it's a narrative that this is linked together. And I think this is in practice a very good, but it was a hard way to get this recognition during the COVID pandemic. Yeah, it would have been better not that there wouldn't be the use of such a pandemic situation to learn that we have to have a cross-sectoral view on things. We have been talking about that for 20, 30 years on conferences, but now there's an economic need for it. And your entrance was about that there's an economic need for it to use investments bright. This is what my state secretary said this morning, yeah, to use it bright. And if we can, then probably we come on this path of well-being for societies, socio-economic transformation. But this is a very bold way we have to go now, because there are many risks. But I would say it's no chance. We have to do it.
Thank you. So we're starting to see, a rethink, a reorganization even within government, within ministries, with political decision makers. Sabine, how is it with business? We heard from Mark Engels, we need business. Business needs to contribute in new ways also. What's happening in companies such as yours or in your industry sector to move in this new direction of transformation? Are you transforming yourself?
Thank you for the question. Let me just start with saying that I think, building really on your point, when the pandemic struck, it was a total surprise for everyone. Nobody was surprised for that, but was prepared for that. And what we really saw was that in a first reaction, there was a retreat to nationalism. Countries closed their borders. We built up trade barriers, we compartmentalized, and in the end, we disrupted our supply chains, which we are still suffering from. But what we also saw that the collaboration and the ramp up of the knowledge, the scientific knowledge about the virus through global academic exchange has never been seen before as rapid, which eventually led to that we had in record time developed vaccines, treatments, diagnostics, but also were able to distribute them and get them to the patients. So my industry, which I'm representing today, really played an absolutely pivotal role to address and overcome this pandemic, but of course not alone. This was all and always in very, very close collaboration with many, many, many stakeholders. And I lived at that time in Japan. I just came back 5 weeks ago to take on the country presidency for Pfizer here in Germany. So I lived 2.5 years in Japan. I never was in my office. It's a very safe place. So we don't go to the office. And I saw, because Pfizer obviously there was also instrumental and a partner, a seeked after partner by governments and governmental institutions. It's a very centralized, organized country to help to get the vaccine approved, to get after that the antiviral approved. Then we have to get the medicine into the country, which, remember, at the time, this was still at minus zero temperatures. Then the whole logistic has to be built up. Japan is a huge country, and we needed to distribute it. We helped to build up vaccination centers and eventually supported that really every Japanese citizen got access to the vaccine. So I think our role, and that for me was very important to see, was important. I was very proud to see how much we could contribute. But I think also we need to recognize that the industry is a partner in such global health crises. And I think it's also important to see that the industry has a broad global footprint, but we operate under an innovative ecosystem that ranges from clinical research, base research, technical innovation, manufacturing, innovations in care. And that is an environment we are working in that needs to be protected, because in the end, the next health crisis, and we heard this before, the next humanitarian crisis, the next natural disaster will come. And we want to be a partner in this to overcome it, address it, and support.
Thank you. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to ask Anil first. Anil, we've heard, also in the previous discussion and some monetary finance figures that we heard from John, that there seems to be a heck of a lot of money out there. And actually also a heck of a lot of profits for the pharmaceutical industry in the context of the pandemic. So there's all this money out there. And then, you know, member states of WHO discuss forever and forever and forever to finally increase the assessed contributions to 50% by 2030 or something. It doesn't really matter when. So if you could share with us how that tension, you know, here's WHO, the one UN agency, the normative agency we have, that is struggling to be financed. There is all this money, and then there's the WHO Foundation. What does that mean? Why did you come about? What's your role? Can you share that a little bit, how you address that tension?
Sure. Thanks, Ilona, and hi, everyone. I appreciate the provocative questions to all of us. Let me answer that in two parts. Is there a lot of money? What's the percentage of total global healthcare spend that is development assistance for health? It's 0.5 of 1%. So $40 billion per year is spent on development assistance for health. That's the Global Fund and Gavi and the WHO, all of these organizations. It's 0.5 of 1% of total global healthcare spend. A lot of the money that's actually on the table is not public capital, it's private capital. Yeah. So one of the things we're trying to do as the WHO Foundation, we exist to raise more resources from more partners to advance the WHO's mission, which of course includes giving money to WHO, and I'll come to that second. But the first thing that I want to say is we talk a lot here about the G7, about political power, but I actually don't think we're talking enough about where does the capital sit? It doesn't sit with governments. It sits with shareholders. And so if you think about moving the markets, right, where this topic, socio-economic transformation, how do you achieve a transformation? You achieve a transformation if you think about where are the levers of power. And we have not talked about all of the levers of power in this panel. So I think there is a lot of money out there, but we're actually not engaged with a lot of the money. We're engaged with a very thin slice of the money. And so one of the things we did we're 21 months old, we're a new organization, we're a Swiss foundation, but we actually announced last month a global health equity fund, a $200 million accumulation of return-seeking capital to invest in new technologies, profit sharing to WHO, but also to associate with those new technologies an access pledge to not have the same inequitable access to new technologies that we've had with existing technologies. So that's an area we can explore, which is how do we engage all of that private capital relative to the goals that have been discussed in this session. In terms of resources for WHO, that's another thing we need to do, which is raise money, but also raise partnership with the types of organizations that can help the WHO itself transform. And I was thinking about that as I was listening and also just attending, being a participant in this session, and thinking about how is the WHO living up to this proposed transformation. And I think we heard some of that last night with Tedros talking about wellness, talking about preventing disease. That gets to solidarity and agency, right? Rather than a sick care system, a healthcare system, you have the leadership at WHO on that. I also think you have an increasing shift at WHO, at least in some departments, of recognizing that the way to deliver healthcare and the way to achieve this transformation is not only through member states and governments and public healthcare systems, but also through individuals as agents of change. How does the WHO communicate to individuals what medicine to use or not use, when to go to a doctor or not, how to actually be an advocate for one's own wellness? And one of the ways they're doing that, so that gets to what's the strategies that the WHO is implementing. And then it also gets to partnerships, which comes back to a role where I hope the foundation can help. The way the WHO has embraced that health information online, for example, what's true and what's not, is by partnering with companies that have a reach and a competence that the WHO doesn't, whether it be Google or Meta or others. And I'm going to say very quickly, because this has been a subject of some critique, the engagement with any company, just like the engagement with any member state, does not mean everything that entity does is promoting health. But there are competencies that those companies have that have been really critical to the WHO expanding its potential, expanding its ability to drive change. So I think those are a number of ways that the WHO is living up to the moment. But I think the challenge is, are those stories the exception or are they the rule? And how do we better transform these institutions to live up to this transformation agenda that we're discussing today?
Thank you, Anil, and thank you for pushing the discussion in a direction that we're actually discussing also at the WHO on the economics of health for all. You know, where is the money?
Exactly.
And definitely, as also many others have analyzed, you know, the development cake is incredibly small in the large scale of things. And we see that the health economy or the health industry, whatever you want to call it, is one of the largest industries in the world and one of the most profitable and richest and growing industries. And the link up between our needs on primary healthcare on the one hand and these financial developments on the other hand is not yet where we would want it to be. John, if we look at the G7 and G20 discussions, I mean, to some extent, it leads us to a question on, you know, global common goods, global public goods. There's issues around global taxation. You mentioned the information industry, etc. How much is that part of the agenda? You know, if we're saying transformation, you know, one of the ways it's handled at national level is through taxation, and the global level we are grappling with it to actually have a different access to those enormous resources. What do you say? How much is that part of the agenda?
Taxation is an inherent function of the coercive monopoly of governments, you know, thanks Max Weber, etc. And a year ago, I would have been very optimistic about the G20, which joined with the OECD, often called the rich country club, to create and get consensus on a revolutionary new tax regime, so that rich corporations would have to pay a minimum 15% in tax. And I know Pfizer can afford that. But all the great digital giants, Google and onwards, they couldn't make their money somewhere and pretend they made it in, I don't know, the Cayman Islands, right? And pay zero tax, double Irish. But now, just when we thought that was a done deal and it was all a matter of domestic implementation compliance, right? It's stalled. Whether or not Bali will be able to find the formula to get it going again, I have my doubts. But one quick comment: if we can't get the money we need from taxes, we can certainly get it two other ways. One is governments make up money, and the IMF does too. In 2009 for the financial crisis, new SDRs, and the IMF just did it again with the rich G7 countries who don't need any of their new SDRs, send it all to the IMF's new Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which was created and designed to spend money for health and climate change control. Final point is stop doing stupid stuff and spending your money on it. Since 2009, both the G20 summits and the G7 ones have repeatedly promised to stop subsidizing fossil fuels within the medium term. That meant about 5 years, right? Not, you know, forever. They haven't done it, right? So if they would just comply with that one commitment, right, we would save the estimates trillions of dollars, right? And save a lot of lives, because fossil fuels burned, well, inefficiently kill people every day in so many ways.
Thank you. And, you know, we heard from Mr. Meyer how, you know, the problems we produce in this part of the world are actually then people live and die under those conditions in the poor countries. Pascal, could you say something about that, you know, that enormous inequity, that enormous unequal distribution of money, resources, capacities, We heard that, you know, COVID-19 is or could be a learning machine. Does the Global South see any of that learning from this side of the world? Point one. And point two, what has the Global South learned?
Thank you for that. Again, if I can,
Yes,
just
go
a couple of
ahead.
comments from the previous one. So the G7, G20 processes, I was involved with the G20 as part of the global health piece that went into that. And I think for me, that was the first opportunity as somebody from the Global South being involved in these processes. There is a lot of learning to be done. There's through the think tanks and so on, it provided a really nice opportunity for institutions in the Global South to engage. What I found surprising was that it wasn't cumulative. So between the first one I was involved with was with Japan. Between that and then I think one of the countries in the Middle East and then Italy, they just, you know, there's a huge policy bank of really rich information that was brought together. And there was an insistence that we engage with institutions in the Global South, but it wasn't cumulative. And so the COVID pandemic hit and the Italy one started, and it was almost starting from scratch again, where there would have been opportunities to really engage. Some of the really nice pieces, the policy pieces that were submitted to the Italy process were from the learning from the regionalization process and how much stronger Afro had been in terms of bringing together the knowledge that had been engaged there, and that was obviously culminated in the Virchow Prize that was awarded. That really brought out from John how much Africa had rallied together to be able to gain that knowledge. So it is, I mean, I think, and I do have to do a quick shout to Germany's G7 process. I was involved in the W7 process. And again, over time, I was really impressed with how much the women's group was consultative in its process and was able to bring the knowledge together. I think there is still a lot more to be done in terms of including, finding those processes again that I'd mentioned before and trying to include those much better into the learning. But I think just going again, thinking about what this panel is supposed to be about and thinking about what a socioeconomic transformation would be and how to engage better with low and middle income countries. And a very specific example that I want to draw on again is from Ghana. So we're talking about equity, and we're talking about not just political will, but political ideologies and engagement with particular values. One of the things that I get very distressed about when I go to Ghana is in the government's the political engagement with the public, with inequities. There is the rhetoric of engaging with equity, but there is also a very large middle class, and all the policies are aimed at the middle class. I think that's what we do in public health. We talk about equity, and yet we focus on the best for everyone without thinking specifically about what it means for those on the lower end of it. But you've got for the purposes of infrastructure, you've got individuals within the middle class buy their own generators when there's no electricity. They pay for water tanks to deliver water for them when there's no water. And they actually pay the city councils to do up the roads in front of their houses or on their routes. And this is acceptable. So there is no incentive for the governments to invest in their infrastructure that is for the public good. And I think these complexities really have to be a part of the discussion about, this really nice documents that have been put together on what socioeconomic transformation would mean and so on, that really don't engage with the realities of how inequities play out in low and middle income countries. And we have to find the processes to do that a little bit better. Otherwise, it's just another document that is being laid onto from the global north to the global south about how it is they're supposed to fix their inequities.
Thank you, Pascal. Could I turn to you, Tanya, then, to what extent are the kind of things that Pascal has just raised part of the way you provide support to low and middle income countries? And I come back, to the dashboard that also highlights the issue of agency very, very strongly. So could you share with us, how your programs and policies with countries in the global south are based in this kind of dialogue, this kind of partnership, how you approach that?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think this is a broad and widespread program of cooperations we are doing. So beginning at the community level, we are supporting in many countries the systemic approach to make a better community-based and need-based system which reach the people who are at the very end of income, who cannot afford medical services. This is what we are doing in direct cooperation with the country. So it's always like that, and it's the same with the WHO. So we are always talking with the countries, and they are explaining their needs and their intervention they want to make on the ground. When we go on the other level, of course, we are in the concert of the European Union's team initiative activities, and coming back to the question you had before, sorry, it's about production of medicines and medication, not only vaccination. And this is something where I see that the next years will bring it to the surface if we can manage together. It's one part of the picture is the private sector, and we see that in Africa we have for the time being now 16 initiatives in setting up different kind of medication production, but we know there's no market yet. It's very difficult to handle it on the continent, and I think this is our challenge for the next 5 years. Can we manage together? And this is on the European level, the European initiative, where Germany is a very strong partner in, but we have to work together in the private sector and with governments and the WHO to really bring it to the market. There's no market yet, as I see it. So it's always difficult if public servants talk about markets, but I was just working the last years in the private sector, so I have seen the other side as well. And then at the international level, besides of G7 and G20, which is a special format, you have been talking with Dirk Meyer about the new PPR fifth fund. So this is in discussions in many forums, and people ask themselves, okay, is this the right instrument we needed to fill the gap? And I would say we are very, very happy that we have it now. On the one side, it's a kind of a process. We have shown as the government that we can set up something like that within 6 months. 6 months. So I would say this is the speediest way to set up an international instrument within 6 months. But this was a hard time for all of my team. But then this is the question, how should the governance structure for these funds now be set up? So I think there is a good first proposal to open it up for many, I would say, NGOs and research activities, which we want to inherent into this governance structure of the fund. And this is quite a big project. And this is in a way setting up the plane during flying. So this is where we are for the time being. But from my perspective, would say, okay, let's try to bring it in a good connectivity to the existing financing instruments we have for the time being, but they are always related to diseases. It's the Global Fund, which is related to disease. Gavi is related to an instrument. So there's no structure in this. And I would say, if we try from all our angles to bring a broader and more sustainable structure into it, and to spend the money more brightly than we did in the last decade, I would say, then we are on a good path developing a sustainable financial structure for a global health system, which at the end should bring universal health coverage and on the ground. And this will be the test. So is there a difference in 5 years in some countries? Is there something that we have shown that we can work together and really bring a systematic approach into the global governance of health systems?
Thank you for that, and the understanding of how things also are changing in development policy. But I would like us to get back to Anil's challenge. And Anil says we're not where the money is, basically. And that if we are to talk about a socio-economic transformation, if we are to talk about universal health coverage, if we are to talk about reducing poverty, then something's got to give. We've got to be talking to different people. I understood you to say that. And there need to be new responsibilities on both sides that are recognized. So Sabine, what do you say to that argument of Anil's?
I think probably two thoughts on that. Number one is, when you think in what kind of a strong financial position the industry is and was in 2020, then, and now I can speak for Pfizer and BioNTech only, when we decided on this collaboration to take the risk to go into developing and believing that messenger RNA would be the way to go to be successful, our CEO challenged the entire organization how we can do it faster, because every day, I mean, you all remember the pictures from Italy, from New York. Every day, people were dying and lying on the in containers, in cooling containers in the streets in front of the hospitals. So we had a real crisis and a real challenge. And because we were in this position, what we could do, we revamped our entire development process and did everything in parallel. So normally we do everything, and Anil, you know this, coming also, having spent many years in the industry, everything is sequential because this reduces our risk. So we are not building up manufacturing, in particular for new products or vaccines or technologies or technological platforms, because we don't know how the clinical trials look like and what in the end is the outcome. And if we fail, then we have an investment, a huge investment, and it's down the drain. But the pandemic, I think, changed this kind of thinking. And we invested not only together with when we developed with BioNTech the vaccine, but also for our antiviral treatment. We did exactly the same. For both, we invested upfront 1 billion to just build the manufacturing and infrastructure. And of course, you could, and other companies did not do that. So just remember, if we weren't in this situation, we wouldn't have the funds. Every day, the vaccine and the treatment came earlier to the market. Patients' lives were saved. And probably another thought. The second thought is really, and this brings me back to talk a bit about equity, because equity is one of the core values that we have at Pfizer. And equity is that everyone has to be seen, heard, and taken care of. And we truly believe that there is, and everyone everywhere should have access to better healthcare. But we can only achieve this again if we are inclusive, if we act with integrity, and we reduce health disparities. So we are working on this, and this is a mission for every colleague who works in Pfizer in our communities, but also beyond. And I'm sure, Anil, you know very well, Pfizer pledged during the pandemic 2 billion doses of our COVID vaccine through COVAX and other bilateral and multilateral organizations. We also, and this is a big example, but we also, and that is example from your country, we work together with Zipline, which is a drone system that delivers medicines and critical medicines and vaccines to these last mile communities. And we delivered, I think, 372,000 doses of vaccine in Ghana to these last mile communities. I think that was in April. And I think the last piece that I want to highlight is in May, we announced an Accord for a Healthier World, which gives access to all our Pfizer patented drugs that we are having in Europe and in the US to 1.2 billion people in 46 low and middle income countries as a not-for-profit. So I think we live and contribute, live up to our promise of reducing health disparities.
Thank you very much. But Sabine, and here I want to come to Anil. To some extent, that remains in the charity model that some people call it. Anil, I'd like to ask you, it's very fashionable right now is to talk about investment in health, which I would see, from everything we heard from Dennis also as this, as a part of this socio-economic transformation, that we put money where health is grown, let me put it that way. So how would you define this investment in health that moves beyond charity?
Well, a couple of ways. I mean, one, I think an investment model means understanding the return on investment. And there's a lot of programs in the institutions that we're talking about, including the WHO, where I think we actually have to present them very differently in terms of how are these in fact investments, what's the return, and how is that return realized and quantified. But this broader question, Ilona, of how do we better align the capital that's out there to the health outcomes we're trying to achieve. I mean, first, I think we just heard Pfizer, it's not just CSR. I mean, it's your core business model. But I think more broadly, it's not just the healthcare industry. And this point that John made about divesting from fossil fuels, right? Like going to financial services and saying where pension funds, let's talk about pension funds. There's a lot of capital there. Is the investment of those pension funds consistent with what promotes human health or not? To me, what I'm trying to get at is let's get outside of development assistance for health, let's get outside of healthcare, and let's actually think about how capital more broadly is deployed, and is it consistent with this transformation, including health outcomes, including climate change. And that, I think, is an area where I would actually say there's been some progress in financial services. It's been really interesting to see some investment platforms and executives at investment platforms pushing the ESG agenda, and credit to Kofi Annan and where that ESG framework came from. But I actually think there's a lot more opportunity there. So what I'm suggesting in this comment, or at least trying to provoke in terms of discussion or contemplation, is how do we think about our agency as individuals who want to advance global health relative to a broader ecosystem? And how do we think about achieving better human health by engaging beyond our core industry, our what can be a myopic ecosystem? And by the way, we already talk about this in some ways. Ilona, you and I talked about this last year, I think, the social determinants for health. Health in a way is an output of many things that are happening outside of the health sector, including structural discrimination and systemic racism. When those things are happening over here, in real estate or in patent law, I mean, in all sorts of ways, then you're seeing it manifest in health outcomes. So we are connected beyond our single sector to what's happening in these other industries, to what's happening in these other sectors. And when I talk about how do we think about alignment of capital, it's alignment of capital in a very broad lens.
Thank you. And there's, of course, a great initiative also that has followed the disinvest in fossil fuels to disinvest in tobacco, for example. And this divestment movement is gathering pace by a whole range of global health advocates. So we are coming close to the end of our panel, and I want to give each of you an opportunity to just give a key message to the audience here. And I'd like to take us back to the SAGE dashboard: solidarity, agency, material gain, and environment. Obviously, we know we should be doing all of them together and at the same time and everything else. And then everybody would have, you know, a long list of responsibilities under their name, as we had with Mr. Meyer. But could you just give a message to the audience if we're thinking about socio-economic transformation that benefits health? What is the key thing you would like to see happen? John, 2 sentences.
I would like the next G7 and G20 summits to start making commitments that actually combine climate change and health. I think we all agree that in the real world, they are closely connected, but not in the global governance G world, with one tiny exception. That was at ELMAO, but it's how could we make our hospitals more resilient, right? So yeah, a baby step, right? Oh, and I would like health ministers within the Gs to actually have joint meetings, not only with their development ministers and finance ministers, but with their ministers responsible for the environment and climate change. All this is just a scheduling issue, but then they could put their minds together and act on that, because sooner or later, you know, COVID is going to go away, but climate change is going to kill us all if we don't get it under control.
Yeah, we heard the alarm bells ring. Pascal, quickly, please. John took a bit too much time. I knew he would.
Okay, key thing, within the context of global health, we should be thinking about the production of health and what that means. And when we're engaging within the global health sector, which means everyone, that we need to have the spaces that allow for everyone to be heard, and that includes better privileging of voices from the global south.
Thank you. Tanya?
Yes, 2 messages. I would like to enhance your advice or your proposal on social protection. So climate change, health, and social protection. I think this is on the agenda because from my perspective, health is very close to social protection. And the second is I would like to see more countries like India, they set up a public health system for 500 million people. I think this is the responsibility of governments, and governments have to deliver.
Thank you. 1 minute each for Sabine and Anil. Sabine?
Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. That's what I wish for.
Thank you. Anil, you have the last word.
I'm going to end on a very different note. Transformations start with individuals. So I would ask, what does the SAGE dashboard look like for each of you, for each of us? So one of the questions I ask, if I'm living up to these grand values, we talk about governance and who controls capital. If each of us think about our contributions to community solidarity and agency and environmental sustainability, right? Then I think the world is transformed as a consequence of the accumulation of individual actions. So I would encourage the inward lens.
Yes, and in that context, something that's been very much important in the divestment discussion, if each of you were actually to go and look where your pension funds and other funds you are involved in are investing, and giving the clear message, you don't want your money in fossil fuels, you don't want it in tobacco, and you might also have some other choices. There you can really make a difference in the financial sphere and push socioeconomic transformation. Thank you very much. Clap for the panel.